Hello guys, welcome to No Code Nation. So today we are going to learn about Bubble database. So in this tutorial, we are going to create a new database. Then we are going to get data into the database and then fetch value onto our front end. So now let's move on to this database tab and start by creating a new database. So here we already are having listing slider user. Let's create a new type of data. For example, here I'll be adding it as for example here I'll be adding it as students database. For let's give it an example by naming it student and click on create. Now this database has been created. One point to be noted here that this user database, whenever you create a new application, this will be there. It is the default bubble database. And the one that we have created, student, is the one that we have created according to our usage. So now in the student type of data, we can add fields. For example, let's say name of the student. It should be of type text. I am creating it. Then let's say it's class, adding it as text. Then let's say it's age, adding it as number. Now our data type has been prepared. So now let's move to the app data. Here in this tab, we will be getting all the data entries that will be listed according to their particular data types. For example, here we can also see for the users, sliders, listing just by clicking on them. So we are at the students database. We can switch it by clicking on it. So now we are able to see age, class, name, and we can modify the way it looks. For example, created date, modified date, slug, created by. I don't want to see these entries. So what I can do is I can check, uncheck these things to make it visible only those values which I wanted to see here. For example, now the student database has been modified according to your requirement, the way you wanted to see it. For example, I wanted to see only age, class, and name. I don't want to see any other fields. So now this view of our database has been created as per my requirement. So now let's start by adding manual entry into the database. First way to add any data in the database is by manual entry. So you can just click on this new entry button. You can manually write age, for example 23, class, let's say 12, name, let's say John Doe, and we are creating it. Now this entry has been created in your database. Now let's go back to our design tab and create a new test page where we can get data from the user into the database. Then later we will study how we can fetch that particular database to display its data listing onto the front end. So now let's create a new page for listings. Let's say give it a name, create listing. So it will be easier for us. Do we wanted a clone? No, let's start from scratch. So first thing, let's insert input values. Input, I am dragging and dropping. It is all dependent on you which layout you wanted to choose for this particular page. I prefer choosing it to column and making all the content to container alignment to top, making it to center aligned. Now this, I wanted it to name it as type name. and data format should be text. Do we needed any initial content here? No, not at this moment. But in case it is required, so we can click on it, insert with the dynamic data. That you will learn in the later videos. So now let's create another input value here that we will name class. It is also type text, so no issues. Now let's again paste it, copy. You can just simply use Control C, Control V for easy pasting. Then we can add age. It is of type number, numbers only. Okay, so we are having this option here, number. Now we can close it. Now we need to add a button. Let's make it center aligned also, naming it as submit student. Now I wanted to make it appear a little better layout. So I am selecting all and grouping these elements in column container so that they comes up one onto top of other. So to add spacing into it, what I can do is I can allow gapping into them. Gapping, for example, here I'm adding 20 pixels of gapping. Now I don't like the spacing, so let's reduce it to 15. Now giving it a top and bottom margin of 20. Let's preview it. This is just a sample layout that we'll be previewing it here. Don't judge. Removing the debug mode. Let's see if we are able to enter values or not. For example, lorem ipsum, some sample, let's say 11 or 11th, my choice, age, let's say 24, submit. So everything is working. But now, as we can see, we haven't linked any of the database values, any of the input values to the database. So now let's move into the database part. Let's check the naming if it is correct or not. So let's go click on the submit button and go to add a workflow. So now what we can do is go to data thing and we can say create a new thing. So new thing, this is showing us a type. What type it is? It will be displaying our data types. So now we can select the type of data which we wanted to save the values to. So now in our case, it is student. Now they wanted us to set another field. What we can do is we can just simply click on add all fields. So now whatever the field we have created inside the student data type will all show here. So now what we can do is we can search that this input age value should come up here. Red means it is not valid, blue means it is valid. Now we wanted input class to be fetched here. Input classes value. Blue means it is correct. Now we wanted input names value. Blue means it is correct. So now let's hit and try it. What happens here? Now let's say lorem ipsum is the name, class is let's say 23, age is 22, class let's say it is 13, and let's click on submit student. Let's see what happens. Going to database. Now see the data for the lorem ipsum has been entered here. Now let's refresh it. What we can do max is like this data we have to refresh every time the page. Rather than what we can do is we can just go back to our workflow And what we can do is here is we can just go to element action and reset inputs. It will reset all the relevance input. Let's see what happened here. So now, for example, let's say Sam Andrew is the name. Class, I'm saying 4. Let's guess the age 8. Submit. See now after clicking on the button submit, all the values that are input, they got refreshed or reset to null. Now let's check the database whether our values got stored or not. So now see, Sam Andrew, this entry has been stored here. So now let's create a new page to display these values that are present in the database onto the front end. Like how we can display all these values that we have just now created in and stored in the database, and let's fetch this value and display on the front end. How we can do it? So now let's create a new page. This is create listing, that can be show listing. I am creating this page. So now what we can do is, I am changing the layout again to column. What we can do is now we can add a repeating group, dragging and dropping. I am making this to 500. Let's say 600. Making it center aligned. Do we need it for columns or rows? We can set it according to our need. Let's say I wanted 4, it is fine. Okay, what should be the type of content here? What kind of data type we wanted to display is our student. So we can click on student. And what should be the data source here? So what we can do is do a search for student. Now blue means it is fine, that we can go with it. Now what we can do is we can just add a text here. It will be containing my class. No, let's add name first. Name. Now we can insert dynamic data to current cells students name. Now let me do control C, control V. It will be displaying my class. So we can say current cells students class. Blue means fine, we are fetching correct data. Then again control C, control V. It will be fetching current cells students age. Blue means we are fetching fine. So now what we can do is, let's preview it whether it is displaying data or not. See my data for both John Doe by manual entry, Lorem Ipsum without resetting my input values, Sam Andrews at the end of the listing. Now all these entries are being displayed here. For example, let me enter a new value manually. Age, let's say 22, class, let's say 22, name, let's say 22 only. Let's see. Now see 22, 22, 22. This data value has been displayed here. So now we know how we can create a database, how we can store values in that database, and how we can fetch data from a database.